It's nice to be here. I like to come to Susquehanna meetings, although it's about an hour drive away, so I don't get here very often. But it's good to be here, and I like seeing so many familiar faces. So thanks for having me. As Harry said, I'm talking about learning from experience. And a lot of the familiar faces I see are people that have at one time or other taken some beekeeping classes with me. And you people understand how I feel about learning from experience, because my classes are always hands-on, because I think the best way to learn about beekeeping is by actually doing it, getting in there. The second part of my talk is or the second part of the title is what 40 years of beekeeping has taught me. I know there's at least one beekeeper in the audience tonight that has several more years on me, but I think Ed Yoder would agree with me that it's not the number of years that you have, it's the experiences that you have during that time and what you learn from those experiences and apply to your beekeeping. So that's what I want to talk to you about tonight, is the experiences that I've had over 40 years. I don't know how it got to be 40 years, you know. It seems very strange to me to be saying that, but I guess if you just continue keeping bees, you'll be there one day yourselves. I've been fortunate in my experiences to have kept bees in some very different types of environment. And one of the places was in the hills of Appalachia, wooded country. Another place was in the rainforest of Central America. I've kept bees in urban environments, and as Harry pointed out, right now I'm in southeastern Pennsylvania in farmland. So all these different environments have given me experiences that are different from each other. And so that's part of what I want to talk to you about. I started beekeeping in southeastern Ohio, 1976, and I came to beekeeping like many of you probably do yourselves. I met a guy who was a beekeeper. He was sort of a back to the land kind of guy, and beekeeping was one of the things that he did. I used to buy honey from him. And one day I went over to his house, maybe to buy honey, I don't remember why, but when I got there, he was out in his bee yard, his bee suit, smoker, you know, working the bees. And I said, Paul, you know, I'm just curious, you know, can you show me what you're doing? And, you know, I had never been near bees before in my life. But he said, sure. He gave me a veil and said, come on out. And he opened up the hive. And my first reaction was how gentle they were. I mean, I had this impression, maybe from watching too much Walt Disney or something, that, you know, you open the hive and the bees are going to come out and swarm on you. There were so many bees. That was impressive. He opened the hive. And this was in the summer of 1976. The colonies were really strong, so many bees, and he was putting his hands in there and pulling out combs that were just covered with thousands of bees, and I was just in awe. You know, here he was handling all these thousands of stinging insects, and they were totally gentle. And he started explaining to me what was going on in the comb, where the brood was, and this is honey, and these are the workers, there's a drone, you know, maybe we saw the queen, I don't know. But at that moment, it hit me. This is something I can do. I can do this. And this is fascinating. And it's unusual. It was sort of out of the ordinary. That was part of the attraction to me as well. So immediately, I sent away for the equipment. Walter Kelly would sell you the equipment, and he'd also sell you the bees. The bees would come through in the mail, and you would get a call at about 6 o'clock in the morning from the post office saying, come get your bees. Your bees are here. So, you know, I started with a couple packages, and as it happens to many people, the first year went well, 2 colonies. The next year, I had 4 colonies, just from swarms and splits. The next year, 6 colonies. You know, I had the bug, so to speak. Within 3 years, I felt sort of comfortable with the bees, at least sort of comfortable thinking I knew what I was doing. I really enjoyed the work, though. I enjoyed getting honey. I enjoyed keeping the bees. I enjoyed the association I had with some other local beekeepers. In 1979, I had been working as a carpenter. I worked in a sawmill, and that was what I did for money. It certainly wasn't beekeeping. But my wife and I at the time thought, you know, we'd like to do something else. We really wanted to have the experience of living overseas, you know, living in a different culture for a period of time, not just being a tourist, but actually living there. And so we thought of the Peace Corps. And we applied to the Peace Corps, and I thought, well, I'll probably end up teaching carpentry because that's what I knew how to do. And on the application, you know, they ask you lots of questions, and somewhere on the application I put down I was a beekeeper. Well, that was our ticket right there, because they needed beekeepers. At the time, there was a project going on in a small country in Central America called Belize. It used to be British Honduras. Not a very big country. It was maybe 140,000 people in the whole country at that time. But Peace Corps was in the country, and there was a project going on to promote beekeeping with the Mayan Indians, who were basically subsistence farmers. And this project was sponsored by the aid organization CARE. And the project was already sort of up and running, and Peace Corps was supplying sort of the manpower for the project, which was to have someone go out to the villages, find people who were interested in keeping bees, and then CARE would provide that person with the equipment for 2 colonies, smoker, veil, hive tool, and the Peace Corps volunteers' job was to take that person through their first year of beekeeping. So that's what I went down there to do with my vast 3 years of experience. You know, so those 2 years are the years I can say I really learned about beekeeping. To be able to do it full time for 2 years, and in the tropics, you're not just doing it during the summer, you're doing it year round. You know, there are actually 2 seasons, beekeeping seasons, in the course of a year in the tropics. I was also very fortunate that I learned from some very good beekeepers down there, things that I needed to learn to do the project. One of them was raising queens, splitting colonies, because although CARE was providing the equipment, they were not providing the bees. It was my responsibility to come up with the bees to put in the boxes that were being given away. And that was all coordinated with the Belizean government. They had some fairly large government apiaries in the northern part of the country, which is sort of, if you can imagine the Yucatan Peninsula and the Caribbean is over here, Belize is sort of right here below the Yucatan. And the Yucatan is one of the prime beekeeping regions in the entire world. And there are a lot of Mexican beekeepers in that area, and they really know what they're doing. So I was lucky to learn from some of them the things that I needed to know, like grafting queens and queen rearing. And there were probably about 300 colonies that I wouldn't say I managed them because there were other people involved, but those were my resources to create bees to give away. So there was a lot of work to do, and I also enjoyed the teaching aspect of it, you know, to tell people about not only just bees, but following them through their first year of beekeeping. And I'll tell you one funny story related to that. A particular man that I met who was interested was a man named Martin Chook. And Martin had lost one leg at the knee from a snake bite. As a result, he couldn't work like with the other men. The other men would all get together as a group and go to one guy's field and work there all day and sort of help each other out. Well, Martin couldn't do that because of his amputated leg, and so he was taking sewing in. He had, this sounds a little funny, but he had a treadle sewing machine with his one leg, and it worked, and that's how he was making a living for his 9 children. So Martin was interested in the bees, but obviously he couldn't do some of the physical work, but he had some older boys, and I said, you know, we can work this out. We can make this work. And it did work. And it worked very well for him and 2 of his sons that helped him. And the story I want to tell you is about at the end of the first year, we extracted his honey. I brought an extractor over and we harvested the honey, we extracted it in his house, and he got about a 5-gallon bucket full of honey. He was so proud, he was so happy, and he wanted to thank me. So he took a mug and he dipped it into that bucket and he presented to me a cup of honey to drink. And of course, in my Peace Corps training, we of course learned, you know, when you're offered something to eat, you don't refuse it. So that was the day I drank a cup of honey. There were no ill effects. No effects that I can remember, but I do remember after slowly drinking this entire cup and finishing it and thanking him, he wanted to give me a second cup of it. At that point, I could say, no, that's really too much, and I could stop there. So, what did I learn from those years in Belize? I learned a lot about keeping bees as sort of a full-time occupation. I learned about the yearly cycle, especially in the tropics at that time. I learned about teaching beekeeping too, and that became something that I really enjoyed. I learned a lot about queen genetics during that process of raising queens there too. So in 1980, I came home and I was gung-ho. I wanted to be a commercial beekeeper. You know, I wanted to just jump right into it. I'd been doing it. I wanted to continue to do it. There was just one problem. I had no money. You know, Peace Corps puts away a little money for you every month, you know, and when you are finished with your service, you know, they give you $1,500 and say thank you very much. And that wasn't enough to get started, but it was enough to buy 40 colonies, and that's what I started with. I went back to doing carpentry work in southeastern Ohio, kept bees there because that's what I was familiar with. But I was also starting to raise a family at that time, and the carpentry in the early 80s was not paying the way it had been. So I did have a college degree, so I started teaching. I started teaching high school, and I found that it was a perfect fit with beekeeping because there are these holidays during the year at certain times. Easter holiday is a nice week there. We can work with bees. Even though teachers do things during the summers, there is some free time, and it's a great time to work. You have the free time to work bees. So it turned out to be a nice sideline kind of hobby or occupation for me that sort of went along with the beekeeping. So from 1980, 87, I was in southeastern Ohio keeping bees, always about 40 colonies. Now, those of you that are not familiar with beekeeping at that time, this was before varroa mites, tracheal mites, and as Ed remembers, I'm sure, it was an entirely different game back then, keeping bees. It was so easy. All you had to do is put bees in a box, be aware of a couple things like American foul brood, wax moths. Those were the biggest problems we had. But typically, honey crops were running 100 pounds a colony. you could get 140 pounds from a colony in a good year. So with 40 colonies, I could easily produce 4,000 pounds of honey. So, of course, honey was 23 cents a pound at the time too. But it was amazing to me, and it always had amazed me, how much honey a colony of bees could make in surplus of the 60 pounds they need for themselves to get through the winter. It worked well for me there. One thing that happened during that time period, though, is I did go back to Belize. Because one of the problems I saw in Belize was I'm promoting beekeeping with subsistence farmers. And for them, the hives of bees were a sign of wealth. And they wanted to situate them right in front of their houses, so everyone could see them. This was an important thing. And I was reading in the journals about Africanized bees. They were not in Belize at the time. They were in Panama, working their way up the isthmus. I was concerned about that, and I tried to address that with care and the Belizean government, and there was not much desire on their part to address something like that. When I came home, I continued to worry about that, and I got to know Jim Tu. That name might be familiar to some of you. Jim Tu writes for Bee Culture magazine. At the time, he was the head of the apiary section of Ohio State University in Worcester, in Ohio. So I spent one summer working with Jim Tu and a number of his students who were from South America, learning about Africanized bees. And in 1983, I went back to Belize, 3 years after I'd left, and managed to get together with all the beekeepers that I had started who were still doing it, and that wasn't all of them, but get together with them and talk a little bit about how they are going to have to change their practices when Africanized bees finally arrived, which did happen in 1985 and 86 in Belize. I did not have the opportunity to go back again after that, and I certainly hope that things worked out for them, but it was a concern that I had in promoting beekeeping with the Mayans at that time. So during these years, I think I learned a lot about management with bees, and I learned to trust the bees, that it didn't need to be something I had to be constantly manipulating the bees to get them to do something. I mean, you can do that. You can get bees to do all kinds of things through manipulations. I just saw something the other day in a magazine about someone who had, created a sort of an artwork in these beautiful glass structures, hollow inside, and gotten bees to build comb inside in all these fantastic ways. And it was beautiful. So you can manipulate bees to do lots of different things, but I think I learned at this time, let bees be bees, pull away from the management thing, and the important thing to do is learn what bees do naturally. How do bees live in the wild? And what can I do as a beekeeper to assist the bees in what they do naturally? And a large part of that is anticipation. Anticipating what the bees need, and then providing what the bees are going to need. So I think at this time, that was the lesson that I learned, was about anticipation. Anticipating what the bees do, trusting the bees to do what they do naturally, and not spend a lot of time manipulating the bees. Work with the bees. Here's an example. I had learned to graft queens, and I guess for a while I did it pretty well. I fell out of the habit, but then I realized that the best queens that you can get, and some of you might argue with me about this, but the best queens you can get are swarm queens. Queens that have been created, the larva is chosen by the bees, they are fed profusely by the bees because it's a very strong colony. And I think some of you have seen dozens of queen cells in colonies that are going to swarm. Those are great queens right there. And what did you have to do to create those queens? Nothing. Just keep strong, healthy colonies. Strong, healthy colonies will swarm. And those are the queens that can then be harvested. And that's the method I've used up to today. You know, when I see a colony that's going to swarm, you know, I've done what I could beforehand to try to prevent the bees or control swarming, but at some point, colonies are going to swarm. And that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity to harvest some of those queen cells simply by taking cells that are sealed and splitting them into small nukes. Similar to what you were saying earlier about taking those queen cells and putting it in a two-frame nuke. It's the same thing I'm doing with a colony I see that's going to swarm. There's an opportunity to create 2 nukes or maybe 3 nukes from that colony.
When you do that, you lose out to production?
Oh, sure. Any colony that swarms, you can forget production from that colony that year. So, you know, at that point, your management shifts from production of honey to production of bees, which is fine, you know. I mean, I always have losses, so I'm always looking to replace bees that I have lost. In 1987, circumstances brought me to Baltimore. It was not where I thought I would end up, but here I am living in Baltimore. I didn't give up the bees. You know, I couldn't bring 40 colonies with me. I did have to sell those, but I came with 2 colonies. So I became an urban beekeeper. Most of you are probably familiar with Baltimore. I lived in Towson, or the Rogers Forge, which is right south of Towson State University. Well, let me tell you, that was one of the best honey locations I have ever had in my life. Towson University, in their vast wisdom, had planted locust trees all over the campus. And the locust tree bloom was just incredible. And we lived in an end of group row house, so there was a little side yard. We were up off the street, sort of, so you couldn't really see the yard, and there was a hedge there, and 6 colonies of bees. So I learned a lot about keeping bees in the city and in suburban areas and neighbors. So I liked the aspect of teaching beekeeping. Well, now I was about teaching the neighbors about the benefits of beekeeping and their flowers and their gardens. And, oh, by the way, would you like some honey? Here's a jar of honey, you know. So spreading a little goodwill through the neighborhood did a lot of good and alleviated a lot of problems. Until the day when the neighbor from across the street came over and knocked on the door, and he said, "There are some bees on my doormat." I said, "Oh, really? Show me." So, this was early in the spring, and I got over there, and there were, I'm not kidding, about 300 bees on this doormat made out of sisal or something, fiber like that, that was saturated with water. It was the perfect place for the bees to go, and they were just sucking the water up. I mean, they loved it. And so I realized more education is called for here. Well, I explained to him what was going on. I don't think he really cared what was going on. He wanted a solution to the problem. And I said, well, wait till tonight, and then I want you to remove this doormat, you know, and just live without it for a few days, which he did. And I gave them another water source, which then they keyed in on in my yard, and that seemed to eliminate the problem. So just one aspect of urban beekeeping. The other thing that happened when I moved to the city was I missed my beekeeping friends from Ohio. I didn't know anybody in Baltimore when I moved here. But I also felt I needed to meet some beekeepers because I didn't really know a whole lot about keeping bees in the city. Where I was from in Ohio, there was no beekeeping organization. There was no group that taught classes or got together at any time. It was just very loosely beekeepers who happened to know each other. So I heard about Central Maryland beekeepers, and I went to a meeting, and it was like, whoa, here are all beekeepers who are having the experience that I'm having. And it was a wonderful thing that happened. I learned how good and resourceful a beekeeping organization can be to other beekeepers. And that was an eye-opener for me. So from meeting other beekeepers, I realized, well, I have other locations now where I can keep bees. You know, somebody had 2 colonies, and I said, well, would you mind having a few more at your place? So I ended up having several outyards through knowing other beekeepers in that association. So I guess during this time period, and I'm talking about from 87 to 97, in that time period, I think I learned a lot about, well, not only about keeping bees in the city and populated environments, but I also learned something that everybody had to learn at that time, and that was about mites. It was in the early 90s when first the tracheal mite, followed shortly thereafter by varroa mites, came into Baltimore County. At the time, I had about 12 colonies in an apiary near Loch Raven Reservoir. Great location, good honey crop. I think it was 93 or 94. And it had been a great year. I had a good honey crop from those colonies. Everything looked good to me. I had harvested the honey. I came back late August, early September to just check on them, make sure everything's good for the winter. Every single colony was dead. Every single colony, it was either empty or there was a cluster of bees about the size of a softball in there. And I was just stunned. I had no idea what had happened. And then I started reading about varroa mites, tracheal mites, and realizing that's what has happened to me. So, you know, I've been at that place where I think some of you are, where you just lose your bees. You know, you go into the winter, you come out of it with no bees. I know what that feel like. So everything changed at that point. All my beekeeping up to that point, you know, it was different from then on. Never the same. So I immediately started doing what everybody was told to do. The first thing out was Apistan. You know, this is what everybody should use. Everybody used it. All of you know what happened. Within 5 years, the mites were resistant to Apistan, right? Because it didn't kill all the mites, just killed a bunch of mites, but then there were all these mites that Apistan didn't bother, and they were the ones that kept breeding. So now you have Apistan-resistant mites. So what's the next thing? Check mite, all right? We go from fluvalinate to Coumaphos. This is the new chemical now that we want you to use to control mites. And at that point I said, I can see where this is going. I'm not going there. So I stopped treating. I said, in my wisdom, I'm going to take my losses and I'm going to breed from my survivor colonies, you know, and I'm going to breed mite-resistant bees. Well, after about 6 years of losing 50% every single year, never making any headway, I thought, you know, I'm not sure this is the best idea. Fortunately, at that time, things had evolved to the point where there were starting to be some natural treatments. Thymol, Apilife VAR, years later, Apigard, and that seemed to work. And I thought, okay, if this is a natural product, you know, it's not going to be something that is absorbed by the wax like the hard chemicals are. I thought, I can try this. And it worked pretty well, pretty well. Now, mind you, those products, Apilife VAR, Apigard, Thymol, it's a natural product, but it is intense. It is intense. You've got to wear gloves if you're handling that kind of material. And believe me, the bees do not like it, but it does kill mites. And so I've sort of developed a process of nowadays of sort of rotating treatments from thymol. Formic acid is another natural product that can be used, and switching between those. I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here. So going back to now living in Baltimore, it's 97. I'm still teaching high school, by the way. I was teaching at Delaney High School at that time. I taught English. My wife and I were looking for a place out in the country, though. We wanted to get back to living in the country, and we found a place in 97 just across the Mason-Dixon line in Pennsylvania, a little bit north of Stewartstown, an old farm, 5 acres, beautiful spot, and we bought that. So for the next several years, from this next time period, 97 to 2005, a lot of time was spent, you know, rehabbing an old farmhouse and doing all that kind of work in addition to teaching, in addition to keeping bees. So it was a big period of adjustment. Here's one interesting thing that happened, though. We bought this farm, it's an old farm, and it has this old pear tree. It's some variety that I don't know what the name of it is, but I see a lot of these trees, and they're always old trees, and they're on a lot of old farms. And they're a type of pear. They're not a table pear. They're not like a pick and eat pear. It's a hard pear, and they fall off the tree when they're ripe in September, late September, early October. And they're a really good cooking pear. You know, my wife makes a great chutney with these pears, or pear sauce. Well, we saw this tree, and it would bloom profusely in April. But the first several years we were there were never any pears. We saw all these blooms, but we thought, well, this tree is not any good, or doesn't give us any pears. And then I took all my bees from Baltimore and moved them up to Pennsylvania. You know, we were spending enough time up there. We were working on the house, so I moved the bees up. You can guess what happened. That tree was just loaded with pears every year since. It was amazing what a difference the bees made to that pear crop. So at this time, now that I have the opportunity, I can expand the beekeeping operation, and I'm looking ahead to, you know, a time when I stop teaching and I can just do bees. And that old dream that I had when I came back from Belize, you know, about being able to do bees full time, that really started kicking in. And I started imagining 300 colonies. That's all I needed, was 300 colonies, you know, and I could be self-sufficient. So I started buying equipment, expanding. And my wife had retired. I was still teaching. And I enjoyed teaching. Teaching is a great career. I enjoyed doing that a lot. But in 2005, I was in my 22nd year of teaching. And, you know, the goal for a teacher is to get to 30 years. You get to 30 years, then you get the full benefits, you know. And I'm thinking, man, I got to teach another 8 years, you know. And the beekeeping thing just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And those of you that have been up there know about the bee house. There was what was an old hog barn that I rehabbed, and it is the bee house from heaven. You know, it has a garage, has an extracting room, it has hot water, it has a refrigerator. I mean, I could live there. It does have a living room, doesn't it? It has a rug, leather chair. Yes, it's very nice. Actually, when I was rehabbing and doing the bathroom, I told my wife, I said, you know, I think I'm going to put a shower in the bathroom. She says, you're going to go live up there. And I said, all right, I'll forget the shower. Anyway, so things were expanding. And at some point I thought, you know, I'm not sure I want to teach to 30, you know. My wife had taught that long. She had full benefits. She had the health insurance. So I thought, you know, I'm going to do it. So in 2005, I retired and became a full-time beekeeper. You know, at that point, I think I'd gotten to about 100 colonies. And I'd also been fortunate enough to make connection with some farmers in the area and be able to start renting bees for pollination. So the income stream looked pretty good too. But, you know, the work, 100 colonies, you know how much time you spend with your dozen colonies or whatever you have? Well, imagine 100 in 12 different locations, you know. I started thinking, you know, well, just how hard do I want to work? You know, do I really want 300 colonies of bees? I'm not, you know, 30 years old anymore either. So it was time for a period of adjustment on the beekeeping front there. Like I say, I was fortunate to acquire some pollination contracts, and I really enjoyed working with farmers on farms. And these are truck farms. These guys are growers. They grow fruits and vegetables for the local market. You know, and they supply the central market in York. A lot of the farms have their own farm markets. And they wanted bees on the property for the full season. A lot of pollination work is take bees in for a certain period of time, 2 weeks, and then take them out. So it's a lot of moving bees in and out, which isn't a lot of fun. That's hard work. But full season rentals, now I could get behind that because I take the bees out in April, I bring them back in October. A lot of these places were great honey locations too. So it all seemed to be falling into place for me at that point. So right now, where I am is what I call the sweet spot. You know, I've got 80 colonies of bees, and that's what I've had probably for the last 10 years. Keep about 80. That's for a one-man operation. For me, at my age, and how much time I want to spend, that's just right for me. And to be able to keep bees on farms for the full season and be paid to have bees in that location, and then harvest the honey and sell it to the same farmer for his farm market, you know, it's good for him, it's good for me. So it just seems to be the perfect spot for where I want to be right now. And of course, as part of that too, and some of you have experienced the beekeeping classes, I was fortunate with the bee house and having an apiary there at home to be able to teach those hands-on beekeeping classes. I haven't taught those classes for a couple years. I didn't teach it last year or this year because where I am today is a sort of a reassessment of, you know, how I want to continue with beekeeping, you know, and how do I want to go about beekeeping. I feel it's about time I started giving something back to the bees more than I have been. In other words, you know, I've kept bees for honey production and for pollination, and so that has been my management of those bees. And the bees are good, they're healthy, but I would like to do more, I think, for the bees. So I'm changing my management style in several different ways, and I'm still in the process of evolving. But I can tell you one thing I'm doing. I'm shifting all of my brood boxes to mediums. I've typically used a deep and a medium for my brood boxes. I'm shifting them all to mediums for one simple reason: comb rotation. All the comb is the same size if you use nothing but mediums. You know, everything is interchangeable. Your honey supers, your brood boxes, it's all the same. So if you imagine 3 mediums as your brood box, that's what goes through the winter. Where are the bees in the spring? Right? They're up in the top. The bottom box is usually empty. That's when I remove that box. That is now going to get cleaned out. All that comb is going to be gone, and I'm going to put a brand new box with drawn comb that was a honey super last year. It's now going to be the top box of my brood box. So I'm giving them drawn comb. The bees are just going to fill that with brood, right? So every 3 years, I have a complete comb rotation of the brood box. I mean, it's not, it's not a brilliant idea, but I think the idea of rotating the comb on a regular basis is good for the bees. And if the fact that no comb in there is older than 3 years, I think that's a plus for the bees. So that's the kind of thing I want to start doing, And if I sacrifice honey production for that, I don't care, I'm not in it for the money, I'm in it because I enjoy doing it. I like to make enough money to pay for the gas, and get around and do it, but I don't have to make a lot of money. So those are the changes I'm making. So that's kind of what I've learned from my beekeeping in the last few years and the direction I want to go. So I've kept bees in 4 really distinct environments. I think I've learned something about keeping bees in each of those different environments that sort of informs where I am today and where I want to go forth from here. Let me sort of wrap things up by, we've been talking about me doing this for 40 years. Let me wrap up by just giving you some numbers. 40 years of beekeeping. I think, and these numbers are the best approximations I can make. Okay? I have lit my smoker 4,816 times.
Probably good at it now.
Oh man, I am good. I light the smoker once a day. I can work all day from lighting it one time.
I wish I could do that.
I did. I won a contest doing it. Yes. I've been in about 611 different apiaries, all different kinds. I've kept anywhere from 2 to 102 colonies of bees at one time. I've made, by my estimate, 13,225 colony inspections. I've moved 945 colonies. I've caught 241 swarms, and I've lost at least twice as many. I've cleaned up more dead outs than I want to count. I've lost about 17 hive tools. I've harvested about 39,000 pounds of honey, many of them with a hand extractor. And I've been stung, well, when people ask me that question, people learn you're a beekeeper and they'll ask you, do you ever get stung? Well, of course I do, but I say, not as many times as you would think. I said, the bees are incredibly gentle, and if you just work slowly and relaxed around bees, it's very good. And I like to tell them that beekeeping is a sensual experience. Sure, the sting is part of that, but the aroma of an open hive, the sound of a hive that's queen right and making honey, sound of a queenless colony, being out in the apiary on a sunny day. I had a thought years ago on an April day. The peaches were in bloom. There are my bees. Beautiful April day. There's a breeze, sunny. I thought, you know, if I'm going to die someday, let it be, you know, in this spot, you know, because this is the place. So I try to convey to people who don't know about beekeeping that's what beekeeping is like. So I guess if I had to summarize what bees have taught me, it's to live fully in the world, you know, to be present, to be attentive, and to be grateful. I think in the end, gratitude for this experience is what I feel I have gained the most from keeping bees for these many years. And it's probably why I kept doing it all these years. It's because of what the bees gave me. So hopefully I've given something back to the bees, and hopefully I'll continue to do that. So thank you very much. Now, I told Harry that, you know, I had no idea how long I would talk, but I said, you know, if there's time when I finish, and I think there's plenty of time, that I'd be happy to answer any questions. You can ask me questions about my talk, but, you know, if you got things going on in your apiary that you want to talk to me about, ask me about, let's do that. Joe.
David, if you could go back in time and find a 25-year-old David Papke, what would you tell him today?
Oh, geez. That's a great question. I have no idea, you know, but if I could go, like the first year I started beekeeping, you know, I don't know. I would give myself a lot of encouragement and say, don't worry about, you know, you don't have to find the queen. Just, you know, I would encourage myself to just relax and do it. Yeah. Yeah.
The last time you spoke to us, you said that you were going to convert to solid bottom boards. How'd that work out?
You mean screen bottom boards?
No,
Solid.
going away from screen.
No, because I've always had solid bottom boards.
Oh, so you went
But I'm getting away from it. I've already started that. That's another thing about that 3 medium configuration. On the bottom of it is an empty shallow super. It's just called, I'm calling it a cluster space. The entrance is going to be drilled into a hole in the boxes. There is not going to be no bottom board. There's going to be an empty box on the bottom with a screen on the bottom. So it's going to be a screen on the bottom, but there's going to be a space about this much below the lower comb.
You don't put a winter slide under?
I would. I'm going to close it off in the winter. Yeah, I'm going to shut that down. And my friend Roger says, well, that's just going to fill up full of comb. And I said, I don't think so. Because, you know, those of you that have screen bottom boards and your frame is like right an inch from the bottom, do the bees use that bottom 2 inches of those combs? I mean, they don't raise brood in it, you know. They don't store honey in it, you know. So I want to give them some empty space there so they will go down and use the bottom of that comb. And you know, I'm going to do the same thing on the top. I'm going to put an empty super on top as a cluster space too. And I'm going to insulate the boxes more too. I think, you know, I want to try to recreate a hollow tree. I think a hollow tree is where bees like to be. Yeah?
If you've gone to the 3-box rotation, do you think that has contributed any to varroa control?
I haven't done it long enough to know. No. And I'm not sure where I'm going with the varroa control. I do want to get away from treatments, but, you know, I don't want to start killing bees either. You know, that's a tough one. Ed?
Do you get back to the varroa? Since we've all gotten used to the fact that those pesticides are not a good thing, do you think genetically our queen lines are getting a little better, a little more tolerant of mites? And should we be selecting our new colonies from those outstanding colonies that seem to do well for 2 or 3 years in a row without any problem?
Absolutely.
It's a matter of genetically strengthening your lines, because the mites are going to be here, I guess, forever.
Yeah, they're not going away. And yes, Ed, I agree with you totally. I think survivor colonies, local queens, that's the future. Yeah.
How about bringing in any outside new lines?
Well, I think that has to be done for diversity and to find those qualities that are going to work in your local area. So I think there's two threads going there. You know, there's let's breed from our local survivor colonies, but then let's also selectively introduce bees that are bred for particular traits, varroa, let's say, like VSH queen. Mark Gingrich, I don't know if you know that name, he's a beekeeper in Dover, York County. He's doing a lot with queen rearing, and he's using their, what are they called, the ankle biter queens. And he's making them available to beekeepers in York County, I think even for free. For these are you know, swarm cells, you know, or grafted cells. They're not mated queens. But you know, I think if we can get some good queen lines and get exchanges with other beekeepers, yeah, I think that's a great thing for the future. Renee?
Just a question about making, dividing the colony. If you have, say you have 80 colonies, and let's say the typical loss would be 50%, just say. Do you go into the winter by making divisions with 160 colonies, and next spring you'll still have 80? How do you figure that?
Well, I don't figure on 50% loss. I figure on 20, which is usually about where I am. So yeah, and I can't get the numbers exactly. You know, I can't go in exactly with 100, but I do try to increase the number of colonies I have above 80 in the summer, because I know I'm going to lose some. But you know, I always lose more. I always come in like 65 colonies, 72 colonies. So then I'm splitting in the spring. So a lot of what I make up for winter losses is done early in the spring. You know, you have those colonies in March that you look at and they've come through the winter great. They got lots of honey on them. You know, you got to get that honey out of there anyway so the brood nests can expand. Those are ones that I'm going to split early. You know, I buy a queen if I can. You know, a lot of people that bring in nukes also bring in extra queens with the nukes, and that's usually early April. So by early April, I can start making some splits. Yeah, I mean, just to fill up the dead outs that I've cleaned up.
Where are mites in the environment before the hive is infected? What's bringing them to the hive?
Well,
Another country.
they came.
Well, I don't mean originally. I
Yeah.
mean, if you begin with a new hive that's just mite-free.
Oh, I see. Well,
then
I don't know.
that's the infection.
I don't know if you can start with a mite-free colony, but let's say you do. Mites will go out with a bee on a foraging flight. The bee goes to a flower, the mite jumps off. The next bee comes, the mite jumps on. So that's one way. Probably more so is the colony that dies, or it doesn't die, it's weakened to the point where other bees start to rob it. And you know what robbing is like. Thousands of bees going in there. The mites are going, hey, free ride. They're gone. Yeah. Yeah. So those are two ways. I'm sure there are more ways. But they don't crawl from one hive to another. I can tell you that.
how did the arrival of Africanized honeybees change the beekeeping practices in Belize? Do you know, or?
I don't know about the particular specific men that I was working with, but I know generally in the country they adapted to it very readily, and the beekeeping industry in Belize is strong now. You know, it's just a different kind of management. Working with Africanized bees is sort of an extreme form of no management, or as little management as possible. You know, you don't go into the bees unless there's a very specific reason to do it. You're harvesting the honey, or you want to split a colony or something like that. And of course, you're always completely suited up. But a couple things about Africanized bees: they are great with mites, partly because they swarm so often. And swarming is a situation where there's going to be a break in the brood cycle, and that's always bad for mites, because the mites have no place to reproduce. They've got to reproduce and brood. And if there is no brood, all the mites are hanging out there. And by the way, if you're going to do any kind of treatment for mites, broodless periods are the best time, because you don't have to kill any mites that are in the capped cells. If there's no brood, all the mites are out and exposed. So oxalic acid or something like that, it's a good way to get them.
Have you used the oxalic acid dribble?
I have not used oxalic acid at all. I don't know if I'm going to or not. I'm going to wait till you do it and you tell me how it works. Okay. All right.
What you're thinking on a swarm that comes out with an adult older queen, at some point, does she die and start a new queen? Does that old queen stay in that hive, that swarm, new location, the first season, or not? What's your thinking on that?
Yes. It can be either way. You know, I think it depends on the age of the queen, the fecundity of the queen. You know, there's some queens that are 2 years old that swarm, but they're still robust, and the bees, the colony, recognizes there's nothing wrong with this queen. But you might have a 2-year-old queen who's like at the end of her spermatheca, and it's like, you know, the bees know that.
So you think in some cases that queen stays for a while, in other cases they make a new one?
Yeah, I think a lot of times swarm queens are superseded and we don't even know it. You know, there's going to be a couple supersedure cells, and if you're not like in there every week looking at every frame, how are you going to know? You know, well, maybe you'd see a break in the brood cycle. I don't know, but yeah, I think a lot of things happen that we don't see, and you know, that's something I didn't really talk about that is important to me, and that's the mystery of beekeeping. You know, people ask me questions, and I swear half the time I don't know the answer, you know. And I don't mind admitting I don't know the answer. And I say, you know, there's a lot of things about bees that are just mysterious. We don't know a lot of things that they do. Another thing is important to me is the idea that a colony of bees is a superorganism, and there is no entity that is like the mind or directing all the other bees. It's like the colony itself is the mind, and the colony as a whole decides what needs to be done. Do we need pollen? You know, I mean, do we need pollen? Do we need, you know, honey? You know, the colony decides what to do, not a queen or some other entity in the colony. Anything else? Yeah.
This is a question about a queenless colony. Let's say it's queenless and you want to buy a queen and you put her in there. Is it possible that if it's been queenless for a while, that the workers have gotten so old that they're all foragers and they won't be nurse bees for that new queen's eggs?
It's always harder to introduce a queen to a colony that's been queenless for a while. and especially if it reaches the point where the workers start laying. And when you have laying workers, forget about introducing a queen unless you make up a nuke with lots of young bees, introduce the queen there, and then combine that nuke with the queenless colony, using the newspaper method. That would be the only way to give a queen to a colony that, and I'm not even sure I'd bother if they got laying workers. I kind of just write that one off. It's introducing queens, that can be a little tricky. You say put the queen in there. Well, it's not just put the queen. How are you doing it? I like to use the push-in screen cages where the cage goes on the comb, so the queen's in there on the comb. All the bees have access to feed the queen, but they can't really, they couldn't ball the queen or do anything like that. And also the queen is on open comb. She could start laying eggs. Once that queen starts laying eggs, she's accepted. What about swarms? You must be having some swarms. I had 2 today.
What about management at your level?
Management?
Yeah.
Well, like I say, I try to do as little as I have to do. But I do try to, it's important to me to try to anticipate what colonies need.
I mean,
I'm never late putting supers on, Beginning of March, I'll start putting supers on. Ed was telling me he's doing the same thing,
Well, what about, do you, as far as like an inspection, are you just pulling up the bottom of the hive and looking to see if you got swarm cells, you don't slap it back down and keep on going?
Yeah, that's a tough question because it's so dependent on the time of the year, Yeah, early in March, when colonies are building up, I'm looking for any evidence of potential swarming. Are they making lots of queen cups? What's going on? I try to read where the bees are going. In other words, I'm still trying to anticipate what's going to go. And that will inform me what to do. A lot of times I'll break out queen cups just to kind of discourage them. Sometimes that works. Giving them more room, of course. And when you talk about giving a colony more room to sort of control swarming, it's not just throwing a super on the top. That's not giving them more room. That's giving an empty comb above the brood nest to store honey in. The crowding is in the brood nest. That's where you have to give them more room. So you have to go in and if there are combs of honey that they don't need, let's get that honey out of there and give them, this is where drawn comb becomes very valuable. If you can put in drawn comb, that just allows that brood nest to expand. I stopped using queen excluders a couple years ago, and I used to swear by queen excluders because I wanted to keep my honey supers free of brood. For one reason, wax moths. Wax moths would not attack honey supers if they had never had brood in them. That's the kind of comb that wax moths like. So I would use queen excluders just to make it easier for me, controlling wax moths, And then I started thinking about, well, when I put a queen excluder on there, I'm limiting that queen to my deep and medium, at the time, and I'm encouraging swarming, perhaps. So I stopped using queen excluders, and lo and behold, the queen, moves up into the honey supers and lays a bunch of brood up there. Okay? The payoff is I get less swarming because I've given the bees lots of room, and you know what happens? As the honey flow goes on, the brood nest starts shrinking and they backfill what was brood comb, they backfill it with honey. So by the time I get around to harvesting that box, it's full of honey. I rarely have brood in the honey supers, but I do have comb that has brood laid in it. And that ties into my 3 medium management because any honey supers that have comb that has had brood in it, that's going to be on the top box the next year. It's not a honey super anymore. It's not a honey frame. It's going to be a brood frame. So kind of just managing combs.
When you add supers in the spring, do you add them one at a time as they, you know,
I
as
do.
opposed to putting 2 or 3 on?
I had one. As soon as they start working 2 or 3 frames, I'll put another one on, you know. But I don't stack a bunch on at one time because my truck's not that big.
Do you find that if they put a super on too soon, they might not fill the outside frames as well as?
If you put the next one on, yeah. Sometimes when I go to harvest, you know, maybe the honey's kind of real heavy through the middle and not so much on the outside.
There's
okay.
a good rule of thumb on the hive is just about getting ready to work on the outside frames, then add the next super.
Yeah, that is good. Yeah. Yes, sir.
How far along are you in your conversions to all new?
About 20%.
You just started this year?
I've been thinking about it for a while, so I've been playing around with different configurations to try to come up with this, and I'm pretty much settled on it now. So this year, what I'm going to do this fall, I'm going to, or as we get close to fall, I'm going to rearrange all the boxes so the deep box is on the bottom. So it'll be a deep and a medium, because then next spring I can remove that deep and get the deeps out of the operation, and I'd put 2 mediums on top, you know.
What are you doing with those deep boxes?
Send them through the table saw.
Well, I could do that.
Saw off the bottom.
Yeah, you can make them into mediums. You guys haven't seen my equipment, right? Those of you who've been in my house, you've seen my equipment. You ask me what I'm going to do with those deeps? I'm probably going to throw them away. They're so bad. You know, there are like 6 entrances to every colony I have.
On your new base that you were gonna put, I mean, are you putting like 2 or 3 entrance holes or just 1?
I'm going to put 1 in each of the short sides, here and here,
Yeah.
and 3/4 of an inch wine cork size, and my wife has lots of wine corks. So
You're gonna put them on the side.
no, on the ends. You know, here's the long side of the super. Here's the short side of the super. Usually the entrance is right there. So I'm drilling a hole here, and I'm drilling a hole here, but I probably only leave, you know, one of them open. You know, but I could open both up if I wanted to or not. You know, that I have done for a few years is just drilled holes in boxes and not used a bottom board. It doesn't seem to slow the bees up at all, and I think it's more like a tree. It's easier for them to defend. You know, talk about small hive beetles. You know, it's easier for them to defend. Mouse guards. Forget about mouse guards if you just got these little holes in the boxes. You know, any colonies I've set up like that, I don't have mouse problems.
Do
And
you use the upper entrances?
uh,
Are you gonna put a hole in the top box too, or?
no, I'm not going to put a hole in that top empty box. I'm just going to use it where the comb is.
Eventually, well, because you're rotating down.
Well, no, my empty boxes are just, they're going to be my old shallow supers. I want to get away from those shallow. I'd like to have all the boxes be medium. So my old shallow supers, I'm just going to, you know, I don't know, get rid of the frames somehow.
You can
Kindling.
You can buy on eBay dial-a-disc, you know.
Oh, yeah, I have some of those.
Close it or
Yep.
make it
Yeah, those are good.
foundation.
Yeah, especially the little metal ones. The big plastic ones I think are kind of honky. Yeah.
Are you gonna put a hole, 2 holes in each one of the 3 boxes, so you really have 6 holes?
Yeah, but I'm not going to leave them all open. I could leave them open, and maybe I will during the honey flow, get more air through there. But screen bottom board too.
What size mesh are you using for your screen bottoms?
8 inch.
1/8 inch, yeah.
Where do you get it?
Hardware store. True Value.
Everyone I've tried, I've got it.
The
True-
one up in,
True Value.
Yeah, up in, near Stewartstown or.
Yeah, Shrewsbury.
Amazon has it.
No question, he's right for it.
Go to the-
You mentioned you were gonna insulate better or more.
Yeah,
How do you plan to do that?
I'm cutting up some old boxes, and this is where some of those deeps might go. I'm cutting up boxes and putting an extra piece of wood on the inside of the long side of a box. So essentially, I'm reducing it to 9 frames. So I'm going to have 9 frame mediums with an extra 3/4 of an inch of wood on the long side. I tried to think of some way to do it on the short side, but that got into either manipulating frames or manipulating covers, and I thought, I don't want to do that. So, but you do have the end bars. That adds a little bit of wood there too. And honey's a great insulator too, on the outside edges. Honey insulates
So you're
well.
not using frame spacers?
No. I use some frame spacers in my honey supers. Yeah. And my honey supers will remain honey supers. The boxes I'm going to add will be boxes that I've retrofitted for that. And I'm just going to add comb to those boxes and put them on. Yeah.
You said for frames that had brood in them, you would use that as a brood frame from then on instead of a honey super. Is there a reason for that, and is it a problem to use it as a honey super?
No, there's no problem using old brood comb for honey supers. That's fine. It's just going back to the wax moth thing, So if I'm going to be giving colonies a box of new comb, drawn comb every year, why not pick out the ones that had brood in them and let them have those and keep my honey supers, as many as I can, with just comb that's only had honey in it. Because it is true about wax moths, and I don't like to use paramoth, so I like to keep as many honey supers as I can with just honeycomb in it.
Well, how are you gonna do that if you're allowing the queen to go up into there and lay brood and then take the brood out and then put honey in it?
Well,
You're gonna end
at
up
the
everything- you're gonna
at
end
the
up
end of the
everything.
season, when I extract that box,
Yeah,
I can see which combs have had brood in it because they're darkened,
right.
right? So I'm going to, as I extract, the ones that have had brood, they're going to go over there. The ones that just had honey, they're going to go in those boxes over there. So I'm just going to separate them that way. And then
Right.
just take those frames.
But she doesn't lay it every frame up on top. She just
No,
lays it
no,
simple.
she's usually just right there in the 4 or 5 frames in the middle.
Oh.
So when you pull out your bottom box, when you're rotating out that cone,
Yeah.
are you melting it?
Am I
Are
what?
you melting it, or are you're disposing
You
of
know,
it, right?
initially I won't because they're going to be pretty dark combs, but I think on a 3-year rotation, they're not going to be that dark, and maybe I will melt those down. I hadn't thought about that, but probably, yeah. But I certainly am going to cut the comb out and get rid of it one way or another, yeah.
And then I guess as much as you're taking out of the system, you have to put new foundation on top.
Correct.
So you're introducing that every year.
Yeah, and I've started playing around with not full sheets of foundation, just like a 1-inch, 1.5-inch
Skewers?
strip. No, I'm not using the skewers. I tried that. It works well, but it's the same thing that Ed was talking about with the plastic foundation. If you don't do that during a honey flow, they're not going to draw a nice comb. But if you want bees to draw a comb, you have them draw it right now. Right, as soon as the dandelions start blooming, that's when they're going to start drawing comb if they don't have room. So from dandelions to the end of June, they'll draw lots of comb. After that, and I don't believe in feeding them to get them to draw comb. It works, but it's why, again, why manipulate the bees to do something over here where over here they do it naturally? Time what you want the bees to do with what the bees do naturally. Like if you're going to make splits, do it during the honey flow. If you're going to make queens, do it then. Do it when the bees are doing it. That's what seems to make sense to me. So.
Well, there's a different way of managing bees when you have 60 or 70 colonies. versus 2 or 3.
That's a very good point, Ed. You know, everything I said tonight, you know, take that with that grain of salt. You know, when I say, you know, I do a minimal amount of management, part of that is because I'm managing 80 colonies. You know, if I only had 6 colonies or 2, you know, I'd probably be doing a whole lot more stuff with the bees just because I like it. You know, it's fun. So, good point. Good point. Yeah, I guess that's one of those lessons I learned as the numbers got bigger, was to be more efficient with my time. You know, when I started having 12 apiaries, I used to spend a lot of time in the truck, just driving from one place to another. You know, you drive one place, you're there for 15 minutes, and you drive, 15 miles, and you're going to be there 20 minutes. You know, and I don't like driving around that much, so I started thinking, well, maybe I don't have to make all those visits. And I've tried to educate the farmers about swarms. Like I tell them, hey, it's swarm season. Keep your eye out. And they're really good. They call me. The guy called me today. I had 2 swarms. And he called, and there they were, and I got them. So.
Why do you take the hives home in October from these farms? Why don't you just leave them there?
I do. Actually, most of them are left on the farm, but it depends on them and the winter access. There's some that are in fields, and they don't mind if I leave them there, but there's a tractor path, and you know how muddy it gets in the winter. I don't want to tear up their roads. So in that case, I'll bring them home. But probably 3/4 of them on those pollination farms, 3/4 of them stay there year-round. Yeah, and that's great.
Well, unless you have 4-wheel drive getting out there, those, like you say, those muddy places in the wintertime.
Yeah.
You can't get out there unless the ground's frozen.
Right. Yeah.
How much do they pay you for having hives for a full season?
Wouldn't you like to know? It's like the stings, not as much as you think. Many of these guys I've worked with for 10 or 12 years, and I think I've raised the price once in the 10 or 12 years. So.
Well, it depends on how long you have to leave them. If it's just a 2-week period,
Well,
the rate is usually higher.
correct.
They're there all summer.
Correct, but I don't do too many 2-week things. And you're right, if I do, like pumpkins, they want them in and out, yeah, then it's priced accordingly. But again, I'm trying to be a one-man operation. And moving bees out in April, no problem. I can lift a box in April. October, I'd be saying, hey, Harry, what are you doing this next weekend?
Is there like a price list out on the internet somewhere that gives like the average prices for stuff?
Yeah, there is. In Bee Culture magazine, it's divided by areas of the country, and it'll show you the poor pollination in the Northeast, and it's like $85, something like $85,
Well, this
$90.
is one of the highest pollination rate areas in the United States.
Yeah, yeah. But that might be, don't know whether it's probably not full season. That's probably a one crop in and out kind of rate.
Yeah.
So, it's whatever you work out with the farmer. Although it's the same, I charge the same thing to everybody, all the farms I work with. The farmers are they understand the value of bees, and some people ask me about spraying and stuff like that. They don't want to kill the bees they're paying for, believe me. So they understand that if they're going to spray any kind of, they don't really spray, pesticides, but the fungicides, they'll spray it at dusk, as close to dark as they can get, and the bees are back at the hive at that time. So I have never, in all the years I worked on all these different farms, this is an interesting story. Maybe this will be the last thing I say. I've never had what I considered a pesticide kill. until about 5 or 6 years ago at one place, and it was an organic farm of all places. I had 3 colonies there, 4 colonies, and I came and there was a mass of dead bees in front of 2 of them. I mean, just a pile of dead bees. And I looked at that and I go, whoa, these got hit by, they got into something. It was right about the time where there was stuff in the bee journals about the powder that they put in the corn planters that sort of create this cloud, and the neonicotinoids from the seed was sort of in that cloud. And I thought, gee, I wonder if that happened. So I took pictures and videos, and I called up Penn State Agriculture, and I said, you know, I'd like you to take a look at this and, you know, give me your assessment. And they said, we don't do that unless you're suing a farmer. If you're suing the farmer, then we're obliged to do it. Other than that, you know, we don't do that. So I said, well, thank you very much. And I just thought, well, it's very strange. You know, why didn't all 4 colonies have it? Why was it just these 2? So fast forward to this past winter. I got an email from a young man, I won't say his name, and he said to me in this email, I live near this particular farm, and several years ago when I was a kid, I think I might have killed some bees. What do I owe you for that?
Wow.
So I'm thinking, what? And then I remember that's the farm where those two hives. And I'm thinking, this kid probably went up there and sprayed, you know, raid or something, sprayed those 2 colonies. That's probably what happened. It wasn't well, it was a pesticide kill, but it was an intentional one. So I thought, well, how am I going to respond to that? You know, you didn't harm me personally. You harmed the bees. So I said, you know, that's basically what I said. I said, you don't owe me anything, you know, you didn't harm me, but you did harm the bees, so if you want to make it right, you know, I'm not saying you should become a beekeeper, but you need to educate yourself about bees, and maybe you should be planting plants that the bees love. Maybe you need to just, you know, and I just talked about, you know, being more aware of bees in the environment and what he could do to foster all kinds of bees. And that's what I sent to him. I know, and I haven't heard anything since then. So I guess he's satisfied.
Did you ever find out what he actually did?
No, I don't. I never talked to him personally, and doubt that I will. You know, and I don't know what he's going to do with my response, but I freed him from any financial guilt he might have had. I don't know. So, hey, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk.